Hi, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Rekha Radhakrishnan. It's so nice to meet all of you. I am the audience manager at Self-Evident, and we're really excited to have all of you here this evening to talk to Lisa a little bit about the new show that she's put out called Before Me. The second episode dropped today in your feed, so hopefully some of you are starting to listen to it, and we're excited to hear from all of you about what you think about the show. So the format for this evening will be, I have a few questions for Lisa, so we'll chat for a few, for probably about 25 minutes. If you have any questions, we definitely welcome them. So you can drop them in the chat if you feel comfortable doing that. If you want to ask them, no problem. We're going to open up a big section of time at the end so that people can ask questions and be able to share their thoughts. I also wanted to note that in addition to having Lisa here, we have Lisa's mom here, which we're so thrilled to have land here. So I'll have a couple questions that I'll direct towards both of you, since this project is, of course, so much about both of you and your relationship. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us this evening. And so let me start by just sharing a couple of things, just introducing Lisa a little bit. So we're so excited at Self-Evident to have been able to work with Lisa over the last few months to help put the show out. I think so many of us on our team, when we first heard some of the audio, were really moved by it. And I continue to be, as each episode comes out, and just getting to spend time with Lisa and talking to her, I'm just really blown away by this project. I think I've heard from a lot of people, friends I've shared it with, who are like, I've always wanted to do this with my parents. So it's been really inspiring to get to hear it. So Lisa is an award-winning Alaska-based journalist, and specifically in making Before Me, she was awarded an individual artist grant from the Juneau Arts and Humanities Council, did a residency at Alderworks Alaska Writers and Artists Retreat. Lisa was an AIR New Voices Scholar in 2017 and an AIR Edit Mode Fellow in 2021. And we'll get to learn a lot more about how Lisa made Before Me. So welcome everybody, and thanks so much, Lisa, for joining us. Is there anything you want to say right off the top before we dive in?
Thanks so much, Rekha. Thanks for the introduction. Just wanted to thank everyone for joining. It's just so nice to see the faces and names. So thank you. I'll try not to cry.
Understandable. All right. Well, I'm going to start with, as I mentioned, we've got, 2 episodes of the show are out, and I'm just wondering, like, how are you feeling now that, a project I know that you've been working on for years is out in the world now? How does it feel?
It feels amazing. I've heard from so many people this past week, from friends and family, and some people that I don't know, who've really enjoyed listening to it and have been moved by it. And it's just been amazing. It's been hard to concentrate on other parts of my life. It's been like an amazing journey working with Self-Evident since August. I had been working on this since 2016 when I started interviewing my mom, and was just working on it for 5 years, and then finished it at the end of 2021 and had this like finished product, and spent all of this past year just trying to figure out like if I should put it out myself, where was a good home for it. And then once Self-Evident committed to it, it's been like amazing to work with a talented team. There's editor, there's like a managing producer. I've been voice coached, there's fact checkers. It's just been such a dream to work with Self-Evident. And just all the people along the way too, people who've helped out in different pieces. And, of course, this journey of making the story about my mom and my family and Lynn. I think what I've realized since it's been published is that, they gave me a huge amount of trust in telling their story and trusting me to tell it. And I don't think I understood that amount of trust prior to the story coming out. Um, so it's been fabulous.
Yeah, that's great. I can imagine it's been an emotional, understandably an emotional time. So I want to step back a little bit to the origins of the project. So you alluded to, having done these interviews in 2016. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about what the inspiration for this project was. And I know you're an audio journalist. Did you always know this was going to be an audio story, or did you just know you wanted the story and then you were going to think about what you might do with it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Growing up, I've always heard snippets of how our family came to America and how I was born, you know, 2 months afterward. That was always just like in the backdrop of my life. But I never knew what the full story was. I never asked questions about it. And I've always loved writing. So I just thought that I would one day write the story. Um, I discovered that I loved audio and joining public media. So once I found out that I loved that medium and that I was good at it, that I was like, this is going to be an audio project. Um, so yeah, so I've always wanted to do it. It was, uh, a gift for my mom to say yes, that she was willing to be interviewed and ask these questions. For a while, she would say no when I asked her to be interviewed. So she finally came to a place where she could say yes. And when my daughter was born my first daughter was born in 2016, it was logistically just the best time. My mom was coming for 3 weeks. So it was just, we had the time and space to do it. But it was still really, really hard because as a reporter, I know, and as a public media reporter, I know how to like hold a mic and do all that stuff, but it was really hard to just be a reporter with my mom. Um, so like the sound quality of the interview isn't that great, right? So I've had some engineers make it better, but it was hard to just be like uh, an interviewer, a reporter. Um, but I also wanted to bring those skills into interviewing her. So it was hard to kind of go back and forth between multiple selves.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've been thinking about that a lot listening to it. And I wonder, so in terms of preparing for this conversation, so you knew for a while that you were going to have the time and space to do it. Did you did you assemble a chronology before of what you did know? Did you have a list of questions? How much was organic? And what did the preparation for that conversation look like?
It's hard to remember like if I had a list of questions. I don't think I did, because essentially like everything that is in before me was new information for me. Like, 90% of it, I had no idea. So I really allowed my mom to dictate what she wanted to share and the conversation. And I kind of have that same technique with reporting, which is why it takes me a long time to write stories. Like I don't ever really have the story formed in my head beforehand. Um, so I had a recorder, which like prior to her visiting me, I would bring home to trips to New York. And it would just like stay in my luggage. I just couldn't bring it out. I couldn't find the time or the motivation or just the guts to do it. And I think even when she came to visit me, like maybe like a week and a half or 2 weeks passed. And I was like, I just got to do this. And the mic, and sometimes I would just even leave the mic near her, when I wasn't talking to her. Like I was just trying to collect as much as I could. But once we started doing it, once we were like, we're going to take the time, I'm going to interview you, um, you know, to me, and it'd be interesting how my mom felt like I think it took us to like a whole other space. Um, for people who've listened to the first episode, my mom and I have the same dynamic as a lot of mothers and daughters do. Um, but when I was asking her questions and listening to her and she was sharing with me, it was just like I felt like we were a lot closer.
Thanks for sharing that. Well, you asked, and so I wonder, Len, if you would feel comfortable. I would love to know from your perspective how you, if you prepared at all for that conversation, or how it felt for you. If there were things you wanted to make sure you said or covered. Um, if you're comfortable responding, you don't have to, but if you are, would love to know.
I think someone needs to unmute her.
Yeah, 잠깐 unmute 이제 click unmute.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I live here in the United States for many years, but even my very close friend did not know that I lost a daughter in Cambodia because if you've been a mother, you know how hard it is to bring out that subject. And so including my children, I didn't want to talk that much. Did not want to mention my lost daughter, not because I didn't want to share, but because too painful. And not only that, I lost a daughter, I lost my entire family in that war. So it was hard. It was very hard. But spending a month with Lisa, actually it was a month, Lisa. I came to Alaska. I went to Alaska to help you with a month. And that month, every day we see each other, and Lisa was very curious. And now I figured out she's a mom herself, so she might have more understanding about, the loss of the mother. And so I decided to share it, and she was so eager to know. And also, plus she's a writer, so I say, well, maybe one of the family can write down my story. Yeah, so I decided to be more courageous to tell the story. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
So now I'm going to go back to you, Lisa. So, both of you have mentioned, and for those of you, especially who've heard the first episode, that you're learning some really incredible, powerful, difficult things. I'm wondering how you felt in the moment. I mean, as you said, these are things you really didn't know. You didn't really come in with an agenda or an idea of what you were going to learn. And I know it was a while ago, but I wonder if you can access how it felt then to hear it.
It was really difficult. On one hand, I was glad to hear her stories, to hear about her past, but it was difficult. Like growing up, I think I saw my mom cry once. She's a really strong woman. So in the interview process, she cried a few times. So that was really hard, and to know that it was caused by my asking questions and her having to revisit these memories. So yeah, it was hard. And then, writing this, like throughout writing it and revisiting the tape, and even through this process of working with Self-Evident and revisiting the script and doing more writing. Yeah, it's like really, really emotional and hard. But like it's allowed me to get closer to my mom and just to learn so much more. So, I mean, to me, it's been worth the pain for me. But I do feel bad about what it brings up for my mom.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'll ask a sort of move to a more technical question about how you shape the storytelling. So can you sort of talk us through the process? You have all this tape, that you have of your mom's visit. You're an audio journalist. You want to turn it into a story. How do you start to think about it? Because I can imagine. I've talked to my parents and heard stories, and I'm trying to imagine how I would conceive of it as one cohesive story. So yeah, I wonder if you could share a little bit about how, did you, I imagine, listen to all of the tape and then start to think about what might fit where and how this story, what would make sense to take an audience through this story in a way that would resonate. Yeah, anything you want to share about that process?
Yeah, I think I probably should have done it better, but the way I did it was there was one particular interview, and I think it was I interviewed my mom over 2 different visits. And one of the conversations we had the night before she left, where we're kind of like, uh, you know, we knew we only had a finite time to talk. And she told a story that I was very surprised to hear. And it will come up in episode 3. So next Tuesday. So I don't want to really give it away. Well, wait, is it at the end of this one? Anyway, she told me about her first crush. And I just remember when she told me this story, and she laughed in a way that I don't think I've ever heard her laugh before. And once I heard that anecdote, it was like I wanted to start the series with that. That got changed, but it was like once I had just like that anchor of like, this is where I'm going to enter the story. That was really great. That was a great starting point for me. And then I listened to all the tape and transcribed it. I think it was like 70 pages of transcription. And this was before like the AI transcription stuff, or like I didn't use it. So, and as I was transcribing it, I would find places of like, I would start writing as I was transcribing, like at this part, I'll write into this, and then just sorting through the tape, because over the 2 visits and all the interviews, she told stories repeatedly, like she would tell one story a few different times. So just having to like organize and group and just getting down, okay, this is going to be this many parts. So that's kind of just how it started. I think it took me about 2 years to transcribe and write 1.5 episodes. And then I got to do that 1-week residency at Alderworks Writers and Artists Retreat, which my friend Mary Catherine and Juno recommended me to do. And it was in 1 week that I wrote pretty much the rest of the series. It was like a cabin with a bed, a desk. There was an outhouse I had to walk to. I had to walk to access internet. So it was just like the best setting for me, just like crank out the rest of those stories. And at that point, I was also like 8 months pregnant with my second daughter when I wrote most of it. And then, from there, it still took a long time, but that was kind of the beginnings of how I got to start writing it and start making it.
And I'm curious, because it happened over, a decent period of time, did your ideas about what it was or could be change and evolve? Just, I would imagine, particularly having children would have been could have been influential, maybe in how you were thinking about it.
It was mainly that because the series was written over years, that there were parts where I was writing it where the kids were like 3 and 5, and then but Acacia is really like a newborn in most of the series. So there were like times where I wanted to add anecdotes from later in their lives, which like didn't really make sense. But I mean, as a public radio reporter, like I pretty much write radio stories in one way, which is like narrative audio, scripted narrative audio. So that's kind of the only way I can write it. And besides interviewing my mom and my cousin Lynn, I also interviewed two experts, or my expert voices. Ben Kiernan, who's a professor at Yale, who started the genocide project there and has written many books. So he was a great source. I interviewed him during the pandemic, and he said no, actually, I think the first time I asked him. And I don't know, Paula, she was on here before, she may have dropped off. she convinced me, like, just keep asking him. And I did. And so I got the interview. He didn't make it into the podcast, but just like he was able to provide the historical context of what my family was going through. So, you know, like I'd be like, well, it's not like I didn't believe my mom, but just like as a early stage of fact checking, just like my mom said this, does that make sense? And he was like, yes, and would give me the background of why that made sense. And that was so helpful. I read Nyan Chanda. He was a reporter based in Hong Kong during the Vietnam War. And he wrote a book called Brother Enemy, The War After the War. And I got to talk to him, and I was referred to him from Ben Kiernan. So just to like, as just, in getting my more reporter skills, trying to get like the historical basis of it, and just like, how did my family fit in all of that?
Thanks. I'm glad you mentioned that actually, because it made me think too. Did you think about, as you were talking to sort of people outside your family, because you're both telling an intimate family story, but you're also, talking about big geopolitical forces and a history that, in particular, I think a lot of Americans are not so familiar with. As the show came closer into being, did you think about a balance of that in any way? Did you about how much of it, or whether you wanted any of it to be just about opening people's eyes to that history?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're all very like familiar with the Vietnam War, and the Cambodian Civil War was going on at the same time. And then the Khmer Rouge control, like right after that, or the heels of that. So, and there's like lots of people who live in America who fled that. So just, providing more context to this other story. What was going on in Southeast Asia at the time, so complicated. And I can't even begin to wrap my mind around it. And I'm actually like, I'm not very good at history. Is not a strong subject of mine. So, but I had to provide some context, and especially my mom living in Vietnam for 5 to 6 years.
7 years.
Yeah, so like I never really, that was part of the story that I never understood, because so her explaining all of that, and then understanding that the Khmer Rouge was going over the border and attacking in Vietnam as well. So yeah, it was all new to me.
Thank you for sharing that. So I want to go back to a question I asked at the beginning, which was sort of how you're feeling about it now that it's out in the world. I know that you have siblings. Of course, I'd love to know what you think, Lan, but what's the reception been like, particularly with your family?
Yes, I lost my entire. I had a sister and a brother, and many cousins, because I have 5 uncles and 1 aunt and their children. And I lost my grandparents. Yeah, I had big loss besides my firstborn daughter. Well, it's war is terrible, and it just a few years that we lost millions of a few million people, and many left, many died. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Mom, what was it like for you to hear the first episode?
The podcast.
Yeah, how did you feel listening to it?
It's kind of, I'm glad you've done it. You did it because first of all, for me to be able to tell you, and now that it kind of, it kind of a little closer to me. The story been there, and now I feel that actually after this podcast, I feel that I'm have the courage to go back to Southeast Asia again. It I don't know. It feel like it's so nice to be told, especially war. I think the people should know war is terrible. I don't know any country who's like to start war in another country, whether it's invasion, whether it's the territory purpose. But war is killing, war is tragedy, terrible. But the podcast very nice. You've done a great job. Yeah. All my friends are listening to it, and they say, "Oh my God, I know you for 40 years, and I didn't know your past." And this your daughter telling us your past. Yeah, so that was very nice.
Wow.
My sister is also online, and we can ask her how she felt listening to it.
Hello. No, I've learned a lot the past 2 episodes of my mom's past. Yeah, growing up, I don't think my mom shared a lot. Either I felt it was like bringing up bad memories for her, or it just was uncomfortable to ask. So, like Lisa, it was one of those things I didn't really ask for a lot of questions growing up. So it's nice to learn the stories of my mom and Lynn, and yeah, to know the stories of my past.
Yeah, it's really it's such a it's an amazing gift, I think. I want to ask you, Lisa, something that I imagine you get asked quite a bit, which is for people who are sort of considering this. And actually, I asked you this when we first met because, I've thought about it with my own parents. But yeah, for people who have wanted to do this, who have thought about doing it, and may not be a parent, but somebody in their life that they've, wanted to know their story, but and wanted to record it in some way, not necessarily for a podcast, but for their own sort of reasons. Do you have any suggestions and any advice that you would give somebody who's in that role?
I don't know if I have like advice, but that's one of kind of the greatest things that has happened is people reacting with their own desire to do this, or to just like find out more about their family, a family member, their family story, their family past, or to like just make meaning of it. And that's just been so great to hear, and people just sharing their own intimate stories. And like the first access point to audio for me was StoryCorps. It was like the summer of 2005 when I first heard about StoryCorps. And just like the idea of loved ones interviewing each other, I loved it. And so, I mean, that was kind of just the beginning of it. And then it was like public media and all that stuff. But like, every time someone tells me they want to do it, I'm just like, do it. I think that's just like the only advice I have is just do it. In any form that, whether it's just like with your iPhone, with a recorder, like over Zoom. And it's like, I just want to see these stories made, because every time someone talks about it, it's like so fascinating, so interesting. And like everyone's story that I hear, like that's been shared with me, it's like other people would want to hear it too, so yeah, the only advice is to do it. And like you can approach it with a list of questions, but also like I think the best interviews are just conversations. So as long as you have a willing interviewee, that's like all you need. So yeah, that's kind of my only advice.
I plan to take it. I'm going to do it. So my last question for you, and then we definitely want to open it up and hear from anyone on here who wants to share anything or ask questions, is and you I think shared a little bit about this over the course of our conversation, but and we're not done, airing the show yet. But I wonder at this stage just how you're feeling. You mentioned at the beginning this trust that you're realizing as the show's coming out, that really the gift that was given to you was, your mom and your cousin's trust. And I wonder how you feel having this knowledge about your family. What it has meant to you, and how whether it's affected you, or how you think about your family and who you all are and where you come from.
Thanks for that question. Yeah, so the trust that I've realized that's been given to me is like a responsibility that I don't want to break or fail. Like I don't want to lose anyone's trust. And so, there's fear there. Like I'm afraid, because the trust that they've given me is a form of love that I don't think I've ever really realized. So, there were parts of the restructuring of it. Like there was a part of episode 1, which was the part of my mom and I kind of fighting, and me having trouble with her trying to help when my first daughter was born. And originally that was in the 6th episode, because I didn't want the audience to know how much of a brat I was. Like you could hear the other episodes, and then you could hear about how I was like such a, whatever. But it got moved to the beginning. And I remember like being really nervous about it, because I felt that like talking about my mom and I arguing was a form of like airing dirty laundry. And so I called my mom to make sure that she was okay with it. And, Mom, I don't know if you remember, but she kind of analyzed it in a way that I hadn't even occurred to me. She was like, well, of course you were having trouble. Like I was in your home, like she was just so understanding of it. And so like I was worried for no reason, but I do continue to be worried about stuff like that. And, of the story, there were parts where my mom was like, I don't want that to be shared. And I honored and respected that. So yeah, I mean, I think in the process of just trying to be accurate, I hope that I don't fail anyone or lose anyone's trust. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for chatting with me and answering my questions. I want you all to have the same opportunity. So this is totally open. You can just unmute yourself and ask a question or share. It doesn't have to be a question if there's anything that you want to share. You can also drop them in the chat, and I can ask them if you're more comfortable with that. But yeah, we would just, would love to hear anything that this, sort of brings up for you. So feel free to jump in. Lily, I think maybe, is your hand raised?
Yes, thank you so much. First, apologies for not having video on. I'm taking care of a 90-year-old mother, and today is a bad hair day for both of us. First, congratulations to Lisa and to your family. I'm so glad that you have this recorded. I can't wait to access it. I don't know, I can't remember how I stumbled upon Self-Evident, but I'm so glad I did. Did I hear Auntie Lan, did she speak Mandarin? Would it be okay if I asked her a question in Mandarin?
Yes, sure, yes.
Thank you. I think what hurt me so much during the pandemic was all these virtual events that had different younger generations talking about what othering their parents was like, and how growing up there was such a generational gap. And I realized that I know about something called the Shoah Foundation, where the Jewish community has been able to record so much. And I realized that we in the Asian American community have the problem of, language, and it takes so long to learn the heritage languages. So I was gonna, if it's okay to ask Auntie Lan in Mandarin,
Sure.
兰阿姨，那个您觉得要是告诉别的母亲、
Yeah.
父亲，为什么要说他们的故事？ Why should other parents tell their stories, even if it's not directly to their, blood relatives, but somebody should be sent out like the Shoah Foundation, because in essence, 20th century Asia was all about war. 如果您要告诉别的朋友们为什么这个很重要，您会怎么说？ What would you say to try and capture other people's stories? 为什么 Why must they share them?
你说去告诉我们自己家的过去，告诉孩子。
Yes, 就是录下来这些故事，不见得非得给自己的小孩子。
我知道你讲的是什么呀？因为很多家庭都不愿意透露呀，因为有点就是说我们中国人比较保守呀，所以一讲起来就有很多东西都不太喜欢写，对不对？可是我觉得这个柬埔寨的战争太残忍了。所以应该要让大家，尤其让美国人住在美国人才知道因为这场战争就跟美国也有关系，所以我就觉得我的故事应该让女儿去写去公开呀。
Yeah, Auntie Lan is saying, like, we Asians are so conservative, maybe, we're very reticent about sharing it. But because so much of these conflicts were involving Americans, we need to let people know. I've always said it's so unfair. Unless something's in English, it's like a tree falls in the forest. Unless it's in English, nobody hears a sound, So I'm so glad. So thank you, Lisa. I can't wait to access the podcast. Thank you for what you're doing. It's so important.
Thank you.
I have a question. Hi, Lisa. I want to thank you too for your vulnerability and for the gift of this project. My question is whether or not, or how, if at all, the process of putting together this podcast has impacted your relationship with your daughters, and connected to that, knowing their age, what do they know of this story as it stands currently?
Thanks for that question, Henri. And thanks for being here too. Pretty much I try to talk about it as much as I can, just like factually and honestly. I remember going on a walk with my daughter. It was a family walk, and Acacia, who's the oldest, she was probably like 5 at the time, just like out of nowhere, just tells an acquaintance like, oh, my mom had a sister who died, and just says it very matter-of-factly. She died from war, because it's like I can't give too much detail, but I just try to tell them. And I mean, I can't really think of that many examples, but I mean, I try to share as much as I can. And sometimes things come up when I'm just talking with Scott, my husband, and like, they'll just ask a question like, well, who is Pol Pot? And then I have to like come up with like some really basic explanation of who Pol Pot is and what he means to our family. And, they also know that I've been working on this project for a long time. And when it came out last Tuesday, I just played them the first episode in the car as I was driving. And, the first scene is my mom meeting Acacia for the first time. And so, I think it was like, oh, wow. And then they could hear their dad in that tape as well. And they're both like, oh, there's dad. And it was just so like, I loved hearing them listen to it. And then Lupin, who's 4,
Okay. Steve.
I think I think Lisa's connection maybe.
Yeah.
She may come back in a sec.
Yeah.
Lisa have to rejoin, I think.
We'll give it a minute and see if we get Lisa back.
I will add that Acacia and Lupin, Lisa's daughters, they're always curious about family members. I sent them, they have a wedding picture of us and like the family. And so I remember Acacia would always would go to each point to each family member and ask, oh, who's that, if she didn't know them. And so they're always asking Lisa questions about the family and the history. I think Lisa's gonna join in now again.
Hey, Lisa.
Hey, sorry about that.
No problem.
Sorry about that. I don't know where I got cut off.
You were in a very enthusiastic point. I think you were just sharing the experience that your daughters were having of sort of hearing that episode in the car and how happy it made you that they were hearing it.
Yeah, and when it was over, she was like, "Can we hear another one?" And I thought she just meant like another podcast. And I was like, "Another what?" She was like, "Another before me." And I was like, "Oh." So I mean, so much of making the project, making this, it was so much for me, but like it's like just as much for them. And I think that was like kind of going through this past year of trying to figure out like where the best home for this was. A lot of it was like, well, what is the motivation? Like, what is the point? And while I want like a huge audience for it, as big of an audience as it can, I mean, it comes down to like, it comes down to just having it for my daughters as well. Acacia, who just walked in. So yeah, thanks for that question. And I don't know if I answered it all, but I pretty much, yeah, thanks.
Lisa, I don't know if you saw this question in the chat, but Lily asked if you might consider doing an oral history of yourself for your daughters in the future.
Wait, can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, of course. Lily asked, would you consider basically doing this for your daughters, like an oral history sort of record of your own life for them?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, if they were interested in that, I would love to do that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, I would love to do that. I mean, I think I try to do that in like different forms. But I would love to just to chat with them on, recorded. That would be, I try to record them as much as I can. Though I'm not as good at that as I have been a regular, which I regret. But yeah, I would love to do that with them.
Hi, Lisa. This is Paula. I wanted to say I have a million questions for you, but I feel like they might be spoiler questions. So I'm just going to keep listening to the podcast. I just want to say, like, I really appreciate everything about this show, this podcast so far, especially in the beginning, hearing you talk about the differences between you and your mom and like your little arguments, because I think it makes it more relatable. And and real. Otherwise, it just seems like this really great mother-daughter relationship and y'all get each other so well. And so of course you can share this story together, but knowing that there are road bumps and things like that makes it feel like maybe it's something that someone else can do who doesn't have a perfect relationship with whoever they're wanting to do this with. And also hearing you talk about how you're not a history buff, which I think is interesting, because listening to it, I thought, wow, she really knows her stuff about what went down over there, because I don't know enough about my own family history, and like I'm in Texas and I feel like I should know more. But so hearing you say all of that, first of all, I just wanted to say really made me feel encouraged like to do this kind of work in whatever form. But my question is, hearing you talk about, I forgot what you said, but basically when was the first time you feel like growing up, and it might have been, you mentioned this in episode 1 in Paris, something happening between you and your mom, but the first time you felt like you didn't know your family story, like you really felt like there was this big gap of knowledge, but how early on did that happen for you? Because I know, thinking in my own life, it's like, as my first memory maybe is like, I don't know who all these people in this room are, and that's okay, and I'm supposed to be okay with that, and you just kind of keep on going with that knowledge that you don't know everyone in your family. But do you remember the first time you like really inquisitively were like, who are these people and how do I get to know who they are really?
Thanks for your comments and your question, and your encouragement throughout the years. I mean, I think my whole life I've been like, what is going on? Primarily because I've, so I was in so many spaces where I couldn't understand like the language, and so I'm always just like, I think I just got used to not knowing. I got so used to just being like, this thing is happening. I don't really get it. That's okay. I growing up, I remember writing like stories, like when I was young, like 5 or 6 or 7, and writing stories about like the sister I didn't know and meeting her on a magic carpet ride and how nice she was, so I must have known then that, I had to make up who she was. But yeah, I think I just got super used to being in spaces with my family where I didn't know what was going on. So that was like the default mode, and I think just being a writer has always, wanting to write has been a quest of filling in the details and like filling in the holes. And, my mom often correcting me after something is done, that was always helpful, and being like, gosh, I don't know anything. So yeah, I don't really remember like how early it was, but I think it was just always, it was just how I was raised.
We've got just a few more minutes. I think we've got time for one more question, and I do see one in the box. So I think there's a question here from Lily about the next generation of families. Like, how do you help prepare oral history interviewers to do this? What are some ideas to prompt, like, I'm not sure if I understand the question entirely, but to prompt the spouse to help do their side of the family as well? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Lisa.
Well, I was remiss in talking about like what advice I had, is that Self-Evident has, if anyone who's interested in starting a conversation with their family, but not really sure how, go to selfevidentshow.com/history. And that's part of like Self-Evident's mission at this point, is to get people to share oral histories,
Mom, what did you
of their
get?
family's past.
Mom, what did you get?
Okay.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to give space if there are any questions that people didn't get a chance to ask.
I'll just jump in with one real quick. Hi, Lisa, Chrislyn here. Thank you
Hi.
so much for, well, I'm kind of building off of what Paula was saying, right? Like there's all these things that can come up that become an excuse for like why I take a moment now, right? Like, oh, mom isn't good enough yet, or this just doesn't feel like the right time, or maybe there'll be another time, right? And so I'm kind of, and I know for me, like I've been family history for a while in different shapes and forms. And sometimes it almost feels like for you having worked on this over many years, I'm really curious, like what has helped you just stay, like come back to it and come back to it and even trust other people to help you tell the story, whether within your own family, you know, or outside, subject expert, self-evident, etc. But I'm always trying to balance like, all right, when have I done enough in gathering and editing and, you know, trying to figure out the story? When is it time to like bring other people in? How do I even share that and make this really be a collaborative process, like in actually, you know, taking the raw information and then moving it to a form that is more shareable and engaging for people within my own family, but then also beyond my family. And that, you know, reaches the point that you've come to, right, where your story and your process has now inspired other people to engage with theirs, right? Like that's what motivates me to try to do mine too. But I'm just like, oh, so many stories, and it feels like, you know, years will go by and I'm like, am I still in the right headspace, right, to come back and then do something with this? But that's been a struggle for me. And so whatever has helped support you and help you come back to it, I would love to hear.
Thank you for sharing that. This has just been like my number one thing that I just had to get done. You know, once I said I was going to do it, it was, I don't know, I'm not sure what compelled me to like make this the thing, but it was, and it's been a long time coming. And, you know, I used to joke with people because people would ask, well, how's it coming? How's it coming? And I appreciated those people tremendously, right? To like hold me accountable to the work. And I would joke like, oh, I'll be so happy if this gets done before Acacia turns 5, you know, like, and she's 6. It's taken a long time. And so basically like once I got I got the interviews with my mom and Lynn, and then I got kind of like these expert voices, and, you know, it was just like, it was always going to be focused on my mom's story, right? So I didn't need that many other sources, you know, like I just knew it was going to be about her. So just in terms of your question is like, you know, when do you know when to stop collecting? And, you know, and each time I went back to my mom to say like, did I understand this right? Is this what happened? She would tell me more, right? And I was like, oh, I should have been recording. But it's like, you can't always be recording. So yeah, so just in terms of like, you know, having a finite amount of material and then working with that, and then just having the support from my family and from friends to like keep working on this. I once it was done, you know, there were people telling me like I needed to like birth this by myself, you know, but it's like I just technically wasn't savvy enough to do that. And I just wanted like a bigger audience. I listened to Self-Evident, like before I partnered with them, like I used to listen, I listened to them. And I remember, you know, emailing Julia Shu, who was the editor on the series, and being like, well, how does someone pitch you guys? You know, like, like I had no idea at that point that they would partner with me on the show itself. So it was like a finished product. I pitched the show to them. I actually pitched the show to Ken Ikeda, who's head of Studio To Be, which was part of Self-Evident. And, you know, there was just a lot of back and forth, but it was like, we love this story, but we will have some edits we'll probably need to rewrite it. There'll be some restructuring. And, you know, there was questions of like, well, how much control am I giving up? You know, James Boo, I think, said 80% of it will be the same. And I think that was enough for me, you know, like I trusted them that like they weren't going to change it, you know, in a way that I wasn't happy with. It's been so great working with them, and every change that they've made has like benefited the show tremendously. So I feel so lucky that I found a home with Self-Evident. I really didn't resist once I joined them what they wanted to do with it. I was just so happy that it was going to come out.
Thank you so much. Well, we're at time, and so I just want to thank all of you so much for joining us. This was really, really great conversation. I want to thank, of course, you, Lisa, Len, your mom, your sister. Thank you all for sharing your stories with us. They're, you know, I think somebody in the conversation said, you know, thank you for your vulnerability. I think we all feel like that's really been a gift that you've given to us. So, so yeah, thank you so much. And for all of you who joined, we have new episodes every week through the end of the year. And so that's when the series will end. So we're looking forward to hearing what you all think.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you for listening.
네, 다들 내고 그 얘기죠.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
什么 network 有问题呀、